Hello and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Please sign up at my Patreon to get episodes earlier, bonuses, to have a say on future content, and to interact with me and other Warbirders directly. But mainly you'll have the satisfaction of helping keep this podcast going. You can also toss me a tip via PayPal at WOWB17, or even just drop me a review. Thank you for your support. Now on to the show. Hello Warbirders! Have you seen the commercials for the beer brand that features, in quotations, the world's most interesting man? If you haven't, imagine a commercial with an older, bearded, very debonair man and a voiceover giving him such attributes as being able to parallel park a train or giving a seminar definitively answering the question about whether the chicken or egg came first. During the course of the beer ad campaign, many other attributes were given to this most interesting man. Supposedly dolphins would appear every time he went for a swim, and his fortune cookies would simply say, "Congratulations." He was also the person who invented skinny dipping, and the last time he flirted with danger, danger got too clingy. Lastly, his only regret is that he has no regrets. Of course, he drank the beer that the commercial was advertising. Well, in my research, I may have found a man who might not rival the most interesting man, but he had a pretty damned interesting life. Is it Vladimir Yermolayev? Well, based on the title of the episode, that's a good guess, but no, it's wrong. This very interesting man is Robert Bartini. Oh, you say, this must be a plane from the Regia Aeronautica. Nope, but at least it gave me the chance to say Regia Aeronautica. I just love saying Regia Aeronautica. No, Robert Bartini, well, that's one of his names, designed aircraft for the Soviet Union. Never heard of him? Well, before researching this episode, neither had I. So tighten your straps, because we're diving in. This is as good a place as any to apologize for the upcoming mangling of Russian terms. I will do my best, but you know. So then you'd guess that he was born in Russia, right? Nope again. What seems to be certain was that he was born on the 14th of May, 1897, in Fiume, Kingdom of Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's now in Croatia. The rest no one is really sure of, because Bartini didn't always tell the same origin story twice during his life. His birth name may have been Roberto Oros de Bartini, and he may have come from a noble family of mixed Italian and Austro-Hungarian heritage. Or his father may have been a member of a Hungarian aristocratic family known as Orodosi, and his Italian mother's maiden name was Bartini, although Robert wasn't clear which of the two Orosdi brothers was his dad. He also told people that his mother had been a noble 17-year-old girl who had gotten herself in a family way by another nobleman who had refused to recognize his baby son, and so his teen mom had drowned herself. When interviewed by the NKVD, the Soviet precursor of the KGB, in 1938, Bartini stated that he had been born in Kangidza, that his mother's surname was Fersel, and that his father was an Austrian nobleman named Formaha. Or his parents may have actually been impoverished peasants, and he just liked telling tales. Either way, it doesn't really matter to his later life, except that it maybe indicates an extreme flexibility and skill for thinking outside of any box. During the First World War, Bartini was drafted into the Austro-Hungarian Army and sent to officers' training school, and in 1916 he was sent to the Eastern Front. where he was soon captured by Russian troops and sat out the rest of the war in a Russian POW camp, and only made it home in 1920. He evidently did not like it much there, because soon after he moved to Italy and got his Italian citizenship. He was pretty busy there, I guess making up for lost time, and he became active with the Italian Communist Party, ICP, as well as getting infected with the aviation bug, attending flying school in 1921 and studying aerospace at the Politecnico di Milano in 1922. But in October 1922, Benito Mussolini and his Partito Nazionale Fascista, PNF, or National Fascist Party, ascended to power in the Kingdom of Italy. The Italian Communist Party, ICP, directed Bartini to get out of the country, but not before scooping up all of the Italian aeronautical design and technological plans that he could carry. He moved to Russia, switched to Soviet citizenship, and changed his name to Robert Ludwigovich Bartini. He began working for the Central Design Bureau, building seaplanes, but was later fired in 1930 for writing a letter of complaint criticizing the government organization. But he was hired by the Red Army and started designing aircraft for them. There he began designing a series of aircraft known as Stahl, followed by a number. Stahl means steel, and it refers to the fact that these aircraft were using more metal than the usual old-fashioned wood and fabric ones of the past. Stahl is also part of Yusuf Vissarionov's Djugashvili's pseudonym Stalin, meaning steel man. Remember I said that Bartini showed an extreme flexibility and skills for thinking outside of the box? Well, his work on the Stahl series showed this in spades. I will try to describe it the best I can, but you may have to check out the drawing on the Patreon page to really get it. It's free to join, but while you're at it, why don't you become a member of my Patreon crew? There is now an annual membership option with a 15% discount. The Stahl 6 made full use of an unusual and rather exotic mix of materials, including steel. The internal framework was built from chrome molybdenum steel tubing, while much of the rear fuselage was skinned with an aluminum magnesium alloy known as Altmag. The cowling was a patchwork of advanced alloys, thin magnesium panels on the underside, electron alloy sheeting on top, and polished steel fairings over the cylinder heads. The wings and fairings were clad in thin stainless steel sheets, while the vertical fin was faced with birch plywood laminate. The Stahl 6 was powered by a very tightly cowled V12 Curtiss Conqueror engine, and to say that the streamlining of this aircraft was extreme is a gross understatement. In fact, it dispensed with conventional radiators and air scoops altogether to reduce drag. But, being liquid-cooled, it needed some way to get rid of the heat, so it used a surface evaporation system, which basically treated the wings as radiators, piping the engine's hot coolant through very thin channels installed directly under the metal skin of the wings. I last described this in the Mach-E C-202 Folgore episode when talking about the technologies of the Italian racing planes that eventually led to the Folgore fighter. But I guess it makes sense that Bartini would use it. He did grab all the Italian aviation technology that he could, remember? And if you think that was the limit of the streamlining, nope. This thing had no forward visibility. And I don't mean no visibility used like hyperbole. It had none. The pilot had to look through a binocular tube system to see forward, because the pilot was literally buried in the cockpit and his eyes were facing right at the instrument panel. The aircraft had a single-wheel, retractable undercarriage. Yes, you heard that right also. One wheel, that retracted back into the fuselage in the space between the engine and the pilot. The wingtips balanced on thin skids that could retract and fold up. All this drag reduction allowed this very slippery airplane to have very impressive performance for the day. It first flew in the autumn of 1933, and the aircraft could reach around 420 kilometers per hour or 260 miles per hour at sea level, and its handling qualities in the air were considered quite sound. Yet, as a practical military aircraft, the design raised some serious questions, to say the least. The unconventional single wheel and skid undercarriage was not suited to rough operational service. The surface evaporation cooling system was highly finicky, prone to leak, and would have been extremely vulnerable in combat. Imagine, one bullet in that whole wingspan-size system would have been catastrophic. Besides, the no forward visibility thing, except looking through, toilet paper tubes, was a non-starter to begin with. Bartini was busy with other stuff too, publishing papers on aviation construction materials and technology, aerodynamics, and even theoretical physics. Okay, is anyone wondering if we're ever going to get to the Yer-2? Yes, we're getting close. In 1934, Aeroflot published a requirement for a new transport aircraft for 10 to 12 passengers. Bartini began designing in October of that year, and although he started using the old, trusted and true truss and fabric manner, perhaps his work on the Stahl 6 made him think about using the new technologies, and so he did. Bartini designed a sleek, all-metal, twin-engine, low-wing monoplane. As with the Stahl 6, it featured a semi-monocoque, stressed skin fuselage that gave it both strength and aerodynamic efficiency. Its wings were cantilever, strongly tapered, and set low on the fuselage with a clean high aspect ratio design that reflected Bartini's obsession with reducing drag. It was a tail dragger, and the main landing gear folded up neatly into the engine nacelles, another unusual and advanced feature for a Soviet civil transport of its era. The hydraulically retractable main undercarriage legs retracted rearwards into the engine nacelles, which were positioned at the junction of the inverted gull wings. Power came from two Klimov M103 liquid-cooled V12 engines driving two-bladed propellers, with carefully faired radiators to maintain the aircraft's smooth lines. What did it look like? So, for those of you who are listening while walking an unruly dog, like my Bella when we first go out, it looks like a DC-3 and an F4U Corsair had a baby. Yes, it's a tail-dragging airliner, but those inverted gull wings give it the certain je ne sais quoi of the F4U. There's also a smattering of the FW200 Condor on the nose section. But when you're able, check out the pics on Patreon. Flight testing began in the spring of 1937, and speed, range, and load-carrying qualities were remarkable, achieving speeds of around 450 kilometers per hour and demonstrating a range of over 5,000 kilometers, surpassing many contemporary bombers and transports. At gross overload weight, over 56% of the total weight could be payload. Now, you may have heard someone else say at work, "If this project doesn't work out, my boss is going to kill me." So, unless you work in the field of organized crime, that's probably hyperbole. In Soviet Russia, though, you don't go for performance review. Performance review goes for you. In early 1938, the Stahl 7 prototype crashed on takeoff during full load testing, and the performance review indeed came for Bartini, who was arrested by the NKVD on charges of being an enemy of the people and a spy for fascist Italy. That's pretty rich, considering that he had performed industrial espionage for the Soviet Union against Italy. There was at least one area in the Soviet Union that acted very efficiently, and that was in judging and sentencing criminals. Trials, legal representations, and the presumption of innocence were so annoying and slow, and so in order to speed things up, many criminals were simply judged by a trio of 3 ad hoc judges from the security police itself. Because of the 3 judges, this system was called a troika, and Bartini was convicted by troika and received a 10-year imprisonment sentence. Now, it wasn't like he was sent to work in a Siberian mine or anything. He was sent to a sharashka, which were secret research and development laboratories within the Soviet Gulag labor camp system. There he actually worked with fellow inmate Andrei Tupolov, and they designed the Tupolev Tu-2, which will get its own episode one day. Meanwhile, the broken Stal airliner lay languishing until Vladimir Yermolayev was appointed as chief designer of the unit after Bartini's arrest. Yermolayev was tasked with turning the prototype airliner into a bomber. The first step was to repair the prototype, and after that was accomplished, the Stal 7 continued with its test flight program, which included a record-breaking non-stop flight on the 28th of August 1939 when it flew from Moscow to Sverdlovsk, to Sevastopol and back to Moscow, which was a distance of 5,083 kilometers, that's 3,160 miles at an average speed of 405 kilometers per hour, that's 252 miles per hour. At the same time, work began on turning the Stal 7 design into a long-range bomber. Yermolayev's job was made easier since Bartini had already reserved space for a bomb bay in the Stal 7's fuselage, although there were significant changes made to the design. One change was that the cockpit was noticeably offset to port or left to improve the pilot's visibility. Another was moving to a twin-tail configuration. The nose was mainly glazed, affording great visibility to the combo navigator bomb aimer who sat there and also had a 7.62mm, that's 1/3 of an inch, SHKAS machine gun to operate if needed. A radio operator was located below and to the starboard, or that's the right, of the pilot, and the dorsal gunner operated a partially retractable turret with one 12.5mm, that's 1/2 inch, Berezin UBT machine gun. And there was another SHKAS fitted in a ventral hatch. Up to 2,000 kilograms, that's 4,409 pounds of bombs could be carried in the bomb bay, and 2 500-kilogram bombs could be carried externally. The new bomber was powered by 2 Klimov M105s, which were V-12 liquid-cooled engines used by many Soviet aircraft during World War II, including the Lag-3, Petyakov PE-2, and the Yakolev Yak-1, 3, and 9. It was supposed to use the more powerful M106 engine, but that was not available yet. Due to the less powerful engines, the speed of the prototype bomber, which flew for the first time on the 14th of May 1940, was slightly disappointing at 445 kilometers per hour or 277 miles per hour instead of the hoped for 500 kilometers per hour. The takeoff run was deemed to be excessive and the defensive guns insufficient, but the bomb load and range were good, and so the type was ordered into production at factory number 18, and it was named the Yermolayev Yer-2. About 50 aircraft had been delivered by the 22nd of June 1941 when Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, began. Production ceased, with 128 built in August 1941 to permit the factory to concentrate on building the extremely high priority Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft. And if you're interested in Soviet aircraft, I've got an episode on that one too. If you get some satisfaction out of listening to the show, please consider sharing the podcast with another Warbird fan. The Yer-2 has kind of a weird operational service record. It was not yet in squadron service during the invasion, but the 420th and the 421st Long-Range Bomber Regiments were quickly formed soon after. Neither unit carried out missions until later that summer, when Stalin demanded an attack deep inside Germany to Berlin as a morale raid. And so after some rushed planning and training, 3 Yer-2s and 8 PE-8s 4-engined bombers took off on the 10th of August. In my PE-8 episode, I described the raid in some detail from the perspective of the heavy bombers, and I called it a disaster of biblical proportions. Only 2 of the 8 PE-8s made it back. The 3 Yer-2s didn't fare much better. The runway at Pushkino airfield near Leningrad was actually too short for the fully loaded bombers to take off. But the 3 aircraft managed to struggle into the air and depart. One went missing on the way to Berlin, but the other 2 managed to bomb the outskirts of the Nazi capital. On the way back, one of the bombers was mistakenly shot down by a fellow Soviet, Polikarpov I-16. That's a loss rate of 66%. Because of the aforementioned ceasing of production of the Yer-2, the aircraft were thrown into combat and ground up in attrition, very much like the Red Army soldiers of the time, or heck, the Russian army today in Ukraine. By the 1st of October 1941, only 63 Yers were still on the books, although only 34 were combat ready. The 420th Bomber Group flew 154 sorties by early November, losing 30 of its 40 aircraft to combat, accidents, and mechanical failures. It didn't help that this long-range fast bomber was also being misused in low-altitude frontline attacks during the Battle of Moscow. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and the planes and pilots were just being thrown at the enemy in waves. Losses continued to mount through the autumn and winter, and only a dozen aircraft were in service by spring 1942. By August, the 747th Bomber Unit only had 10 Yer-2s, which were also thrown into the Battle of Stalingrad. The last few survivors of the slaughter were assigned to training units by August 1943. But reinforcements were coming. Production was restarted at the end of 1943, but it was slow, causing frontline units to not receive new aircraft until 1945. But by New Year's Day of that year, 42 were in service. The type returned to combat in April 1945 when the 327th and 329th Bomber Regiments struck Königsberg. There were about 100 Yer-2s still fighting by the end of the conflict in Europe. The Yer-2 remained in service with the Soviet long-range aviation until it was replaced in the late 1940s by 4-engine bombers, such as the Tupolev Tu-4. There were several variants of only several units each, known as the Yer-4 and the Yer-6. These were just experiments with different power plants, such as diesel engines. One experiment had cannon armament placed in the nose. One aircraft was modified as a testbed for captured Argus AS-014 pulse jet engines. 2 examples were modified to Yer-2ON, or special assignments. These were modified to a 12-seat VIP cabin with the military equipment removed and long-range fuel tanks added in the bomb bay. I do not know what happened to the single Stal 7 airliner prototype, and as far as I can tell, of the 360 to 370 aircraft built. Not a single example of the Yer-2 exists today. As described before, losses in combat were extremely high, and those that survived the war were quickly retired and scrapped once four-engine bombers like the Tu-4 came into service. Unfortunately, unlike aircraft such as the Pe-2 or Il-2, the Yer-2 never became a cultural or symbolic icon that might have motivated preservation. So at present anyway, the Yer-2 is a lost wartime Soviet bomber, known only through photographs, drawings, and written accounts. War Thunder has also breathed new life into the type, at least in the digital world, and now you, dear listeners, are also tasked with remembering. So what about the Soviet Union's most interesting man? Amazingly, he remained working in custody until 1946. After release, he worked at the Dimitrov Aircraft Factory until 1952, later becoming the chief engineer of advanced aircraft designs at the Scientific Research Institute in Novosibirsk. In 1956, Bartini was officially rehabilitated by the Soviet state by Nikita Khrushchev under the process of de-Stalinization. The whole time, Bartini was designing different flying machines and publishing papers on theoretical physics. One theoretical physics paper on space-time was published in the prestigious Proceedings of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The funny thing was that Bartini had signed it with his old nobleman's name, Roberto Oros di Bartini. Many prominent physicists initially thought that it was a hoax by a fictitious physicist. Oh, Roberto. In 1961, Bartini had proposed a nuclear-powered supersonic long-range reconnaissance aircraft, but the project was never started. He also worked on some of the interesting and exotic ekranoplans of the Soviet Union. These are aircraft that only operate in what is known as ground effect, when the vehicle is less than the wingspan length from the surface, usually water. His last project was the Bartini-Beriev VVA-14, which was an experimental anti-submarine ekranoplan featuring vertical takeoff. It truly is a weird machine that looks more like a spacecraft. I'll put a picture on the Patreon. Many other Soviet aerospace engineers mention Bartini as an influence, including Sergei Ilyushin, Oleg Antonov, Alexander Yakovlev, and Sergei Pavlovich Korolev, the father of the Soviet rocket program. Bartini died on the 6th of December 1973 in Moscow at the age of 77. He is buried at Vevenskoye Cemetery. His grave features a monument with the inscription, open quotes, "In the land of the Soviets, he kept his oath to devote all life that the red planes flew faster than the black ones." Close quotes. Lastly, it seems sad that our star airplane today wasn't even named for Bartini, but for Vladimir Yermolayev, who finished up the mostly completed project when Bartini was tossed into the Gulag. And what about Yermolayev? Did he lead a similarly interesting life to Bartini? No. Yermolayev died in 1944 of typhoid. Before signing off, I would like to invite you all to join me in wishing Tanner a very happy birthday. I hope you have enjoyed your requested birthday present episode. Thanks to all who support the podcast through Patreon. I really appreciate it. You can also check out some photos of what we've been talking about on the Patreon page. These are available to all, and why not join Patreon? There's a free option, and if you can't, just leave me a good review. Until next time.